When the HOA board tried to drown my daughter at our cabin, I thought it was the most horrific accident I'd ever witnessed. I was wrong. It wasn't an accident at all. The scream that tore through the afternoon air on July 15th still haunts me. My 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had been playing on our private dock, the same dock where I'd spent countless summers as a child. The same dock my father built with his own hands 40 years ago. She was wearing her favorite purple swimsuit, the one with the little seahorses that she insisted made her swim faster. What I saw when I burst through the screen door defied comprehension. Emma was in the water, but not swimming. She was thrashing, panicking, going under. And standing on the shore, watching with cold indifference, were 3 members of our HOA board: Margaret Chen, the president, her lapdog treasurer, Bob Hoffman, and that snake of a secretary, Janet Morrison. I dove in without thinking, my clothes still on, my phone forgotten in my pocket. The water was deeper than it should have been near our dock. Much deeper. As I pulled Emma's shaking body against mine, I could feel it. The bottom had been dredged out. Someone had deliberately created a drop-off right where children would naturally play. "Why didn't you help her?" I gasped, carrying Emma to shore, her arms wrapped around my neck like a vice. She was sobbing, choking on lake water, her whole body trembling. Margaret's response chilled me more than the lake water, soaking my clothes. "Perhaps you should consider whether this property is really suitable for children." Her voice was flat, emotionless. Accidents happen when people don't belong. Don't belong. Those words echoed in my head as I wrapped Emma in a towel, as I held her close, as I watched these 3 vultures exchange meaningful looks. My family had been coming to this lake for 4 decades. This was our sanctuary, our legacy, our home away from home. But something in Margaret's tone, in the way they'd positioned themselves, in their complete lack of surprise or concern, told me this was no accident. The pieces started clicking together in my mind as Emma's breathing finally steadied against my chest. 2 weeks earlier, we'd received a certified letter from the HOA demanding we cease unauthorized use of lake access. They claimed our cabin, while grandfathered into the community, didn't include water rights. They wanted us to pay a $15,000 annual fee for lake access or lose it entirely. I'd laughed it off, thrown the letter in the trash. My grandfather had bought this property in 1952, long before any HOA existed. We had every legal right to be here. Now, holding my traumatized daughter, I realized they weren't asking anymore. They were taking action. "Daddy, I couldn't touch the bottom," Emma whispered against my ear. "It just dropped off." The lady with the clipboard was watching me before I fell in. She was smiling. My blood ran cold. Emma had fallen in, but she was a strong swimmer. She'd been swimming in this lake since she was 4 years old. She knew every inch of our swimming area. Except now, someone had changed it. I looked back at the 3 board members, who were now walking away, their work apparently done. Margaret called over her shoulder, "We'll be sending another notice about the lake access fees. I suggest you pay more attention this time." The threat was clear. This wasn't about fees or regulations. This was about power, about control, about forcing out anyone who didn't bow to their authority. They'd literally endangered my child's life to make a point. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep clutching her stuffed dolphin, I sat on the deck, staring out at the lake. The water looked innocent in the moonlight, but I knew better now. I knew what lurked beneath the surface, not just the artificially deepened drop-off, but something far more dangerous. A group of people so drunk on their own authority that they'd risk a child's life to prove a point. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to the police, who took a report but seemed skeptical about proving intent. Then to a lawyer, who listened carefully and asked pointed questions about our property documentation. Finally, to my father, who was now 82 and living in Arizona. "Dad, I need you to find something for me," I said. "Remember those old property deeds you kept in the safe? The original ones, from when Grandpa bought the cabin?" "What's this about, son?" "Those bastards picked the wrong family to mess with," he growled. "I'll overnight you every documents I have. But first, let me tell you something those HOA vultures don't know." What he told me next changed everything. It explained why they were so desperate to force us out, why they'd escalated to physical intimidation, why they seemed to think they could get away with anything. It also gave me exactly what I needed to destroy them. But first, I had to keep Emma safe. As I hung up the phone, I looked back toward the HOA president's house, lights still burning in her windows. She probably thought she'd won, that her message had been delivered loud and clear. She had no idea that the real battle was just beginning. And she definitely didn't know that she'd just declared war on the wrong man's daughter. Some mistakes you can't take back. Some lines you can't uncross. Margaret Chen and her board had crossed one tonight that would cost them everything. The lake looked peaceful in the darkness, but storms were coming, and this time, they'd be the ones drowning in consequences they never saw coming. The FedEx envelope arrived at 9 a.m. the next morning, and when I opened it, I understood why my father's voice had carried that edge of satisfaction. Inside were copies of documents that went back 70 years: surveys, deeds, water rights certificates, and mineral rights papers that told a story the HOA had never bothered to investigate. But it was the handwritten letter from my father that made everything click into place. "Son," it read in his careful script, "what I'm about to tell you, your grandfather made me swear I'd only share if the family was ever threatened. When he bought that property in 1952, he didn't just buy the cabin lot. He bought the entire lake bed and all water rights to Crystal Lake. The HOA was built around our property 20 years later, and they've been operating under a massive assumption this whole time." I had to read it twice before the implication sank in. My grandfather hadn't just owned lake access. He'd owned the actual lake. Every drop of water, those HOA houses surrounded, every fish that swam in it, every dock that extended into it, it all belonged to my family. The HOA had been charging people for access to my lake for 2 decades. But there was more. Dad's letter continued. The development company that built those houses knew about our ownership, but they figured we'd never find out or care. They've been collecting millions in lake access fees from homeowners who think they're paying the community association. Margaret Chen and her board have been pocketing money for access to property they don't own. I called my lawyer immediately. "Sarah, it's David. I need you to clear your schedule. What I'm about to tell you is going to change everything about this case." Sarah Mitchell had been our family attorney for 15 years. She'd handled my divorce, my father's estate planning, and various business contracts. She was sharp, thorough, and had zero tolerance for bullies. When I finished explaining what I'd discovered, the silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. They tried to kill my daughter, Sarah. Yesterday wasn't about fees or regulations. They knew they were stealing from us and got desperate when I didn't immediately cave to their demands. We need to move carefully here. If they're willing to endanger a child, there's no telling what they'll do when they realize their entire operation is about to collapse. I'm sending an investigator to the lake today. Don't say anything to anyone until we know exactly what we're dealing with. But while Sarah worked the legal angle, I couldn't sit still. I needed to understand the full scope of what the HOA had been doing. I spent the morning walking the shoreline, paying attention to details I'd never noticed before. Every house in the development had a dock. 43 houses, each paying what I now learned was a $12,000 annual lake maintenance fee on top of their regular HOA dues. That was over $500,000 a year, money that should have been coming to my family as the actual lake owners. More disturbing were the security cameras I spotted. Expensive, professional-grade equipment positioned to monitor every inch of shoreline. They hadn't just been watching for violations. They'd been documenting who used the lake and when, building cases against anyone who might challenge their authority, including my family. I was studying one of the cameras when my phone rang. It was Dr. Patricia Williams, Emma's pediatrician, calling with the results of the examination I'd insisted on after the accident. "David, I need to see you and Emma in my office today. The water samples you brought in from the lake came back with some concerning results." "What kind of results?" "The water near your dock has been contaminated with a mild sedative. Not enough to seriously harm an adult, but for a child Emma's size, it would cause disorientation and muscle weakness. Exactly the symptoms you described an experienced swimmer, suddenly unable to stay afloat." The phone nearly slipped from my hands. They hadn't just dredged the bottom to create a dangerous drop-off. They'd drugged the water. The HOA board had literally poisoned the lake to incapacitate my daughter. This wasn't harassment anymore. It wasn't even attempted murder. It was something far more calculated and sick. I hung up and immediately called Sarah back. "They drugged her," I said, without preamble. "The doctor found sedatives in the lake water. They poisoned my daughter and watched her nearly drown." Jesus Christ, David. We're not dealing with an overreaching HOA anymore. We're dealing with criminals. Real criminals. I'm calling the FBI. "No," I said, surprised by the coldness in my own voice. "Not yet. First, I want to know everything. Every scheme, every victim, every dollar they've stolen. Then we destroy them completely." "David, I understand you're angry, but they made this personal when they hurt Emma. Now I'm going to return the favor." That afternoon, while Emma napped under my watchful eye, I did something I'd never done before. I hacked into the HOA's financial records. Well, hacked is probably too strong a word. Their website security was laughably weak, and their treasurer Bob Hoffman used his dog's name as a password for everything. What I found made my blood boil. Margaret Chen personally had diverted over $200,000 into accounts under her daughter's name. Bob Hoffman had used HOA funds to pay for his boat, his truck, and what appeared to be a vacation home in Florida. Janet Morrison had been billing the association for administrative services performed by a consulting company that existed only on paper and was registered to her husband. They'd stolen nearly $2 million over 8 years. From residents who trusted them. From a community that believed in their leadership. And when I'd refused to pay their extortion fee, when I'd threatened their perfect little criminal enterprise, simply by existing as the rightful owner, they decided to eliminate the problem by eliminating my daughter. That evening, Emma finally felt well enough to sit on the deck with me. She was quiet, clinging closer than usual, occasionally glancing nervously toward the water. "Daddy, why did those people want to hurt me? How do you explain pure evil to an 8-year-old? How do you tell your daughter that adults she trusted had tried to kill her for money? Sometimes, sweetheart, people do terrible things when they're scared of getting in trouble. But I promise you, they're never going to hurt you again. Are we going to have to leave the lake?" I pulled her closer, feeling the weight of all those documents, all that evidence, all that righteous fury building in my chest. "No, baby. We're not leaving. This is our lake, our home. And anyone who tries to take it from us is going to learn a very hard lesson about messing with our family." As the sun set over Crystal Lake, my lake, I made a promise to my daughter and to myself. Margaret Chen and her board thought they could intimidate us, poison us, even murder us to protect their criminal empire. They had no idea that they'd just declared war on the actual owner of everything they'd been stealing. And tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The next morning, I made a decision that would either end this nightmare or escalate it beyond repair. I was going to confront Margaret Chen directly, armed with everything I'd discovered. Sarah had advised against it, warning that desperate criminals do desperate things. But they'd already tried to murder my daughter. How much more desperate could they get? "We need to talk, Margaret." She looked up, and for a split second, I caught something in her eyes. Not surprise calculation. She'd been expecting this conversation. "David, I'm sorry about your daughter's accident yesterday. Perhaps we should discuss installing some safety barriers around that dangerous drop-off." The casual way she acknowledged what they'd done, the complete lack of remorse, made my vision blur with rage. But I forced myself to stay calm. I needed her to reveal more. "Accident?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the toxicology report. "Explain to me how lorazepam accidentally got into the water around my dock." Her pruning shears stopped moving. For the first time, Margaret Chen looked genuinely rattled. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Really? Because my daughter's pediatrician found enough sedatives in her system to incapacitate a grown woman? Funny how that happened right where you three were standing watch." Margaret set down her shears and straightened to her full height. The mask of concerned neighbor slipped away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Prove it." Two words that told me everything I needed to know. No denial, no outrage, no shock that I would accuse her of such a horrific crime. Just a challenge to prove what we both knew she'd done. "I don't have to prove anything, Margaret. The FBI will do that when I turn over my evidence." "What evidence?" Her voice carried a new edge now. "You have water samples that could have been contaminated by anything. You have medical reports that prove your daughter ingested something, not where or how. You have suspicions and accusations, not evidence." She stepped closer, and I caught the scent of her expensive perfume mixed with something else, the metallic smell of fear. "But let me tell you what I have," she continued. "I have security footage of your daughter playing unsupervised near a known hazard. I have documentation of your family's repeated violations of community safety standards. I have testimony from 3 board members about your aggressive, threatening behavior toward association leadership." My hands clenched into fists. She was already building her defense, already constructing a narrative where I was the unstable outsider threatening a peaceful community. "You think you're untouchable," I said. "You think because you've been stealing from these people for years, because you've got your little criminal enterprise running smoothly, that no one can touch you." Her eyes narrowed. "I think you're a disturbed man making wild accusations to cover up your own negligence as a parent." "My negligence?" The words came out louder than I intended. "You poisoned the water and watched her nearly drown." "Lower your voice," Margaret hissed, glancing toward her neighbors' houses. "You're creating a scene. Lady, you haven't seen anything yet." That's when Bob Hoffman appeared from around the side of the house. The treasurer was a soft, pudgy man in his 60s who looked more like an accountant than a criminal. But his eyes held the same cold calculation as Margaret's. "Having trouble, Margaret?" he asked, but he was looking at me with undisguised hostility. "Mr. Peterson was just leaving," Margaret said. "Weren't you, David?" "Actually, I was just getting started." I pulled out the folder. Sarah had prepared copies of all the financial records I'd discovered. "Tell me, Bob, how exactly do you justify a $47,000 charge for emergency dock maintenance last month when no maintenance was performed?" Bob's face went pale. "I don't know what or the $23,000 payment to Morrison Consulting Services for community planning when Janet's husband's company doesn't actually provide any services?" Margaret stepped between us. "You need to leave, now. Or the $2 million fishing rights contract you sold to Lakeside Commercial Fishing? Rights you don't own to sell?" The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the color drain from both their faces as the implications hit them. They thought I was just an angry parent making noise. They hadn't realized I knew about their entire operation. Margaret recovered first. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with thieves and attempted murderers who are about to lose everything." "You're dealing with people who have connections," Bob said, finding his voice. "People who can make your life very difficult. More difficult than trying to murder my daughter." "No one tried to murder anyone," Margaret snapped. "Your daughter had an accident because you weren't supervising her properly. Everything else is in your imagination. The toxicology report isn't imagination. Toxicology reports can be wrong. Medical records can be misinterpreted. Accidents happen, especially to children whose parents aren't paying attention." The threat in her voice was crystal clear. They were going to blame me, paint me as a negligent father whose daughter nearly died because of my carelessness, turn the entire community against me while they continue their criminal enterprise. "You think you've got this all figured out," I said. "You think you can discredit me, make me look unstable, and go back to business as usual?" "I think you're a grief-stricken father, looking for someone to blame for your own failures," Margaret replied smoothly. "And I think this community will rally around its elected leadership against outside agitators making false accusations." That's when Janet Morrison appeared from the backyard. The three of them together, closing ranks, presenting a united front. They'd done this before, circled the wagons when someone got too close to the truth. "Margaret, is there a problem?" Janet asked, but her eyes were fixed on me with cold hatred. "Just a misunderstanding," Margaret said. Mr. Peterson was leaving. "Actually," I said, pulling out the final document from my folder, "I was wondering if you could help me understand this." I held up the original property deed, the one that clearly showed my grandfather's ownership of the entire lakebed and all water rights, the one that made their entire operation illegal. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Margaret grabbed for the document, but I pulled it back out of reach. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. "From my family's records. The records that show my grandfather owned this entire lake when your development was built around it." "That's impossible," Bob stammered. "The development company assured us." "The development company knew exactly what they were doing," I interrupted. "They just bet that my family would never find out or care. But they were wrong." Janet looked like she might vomit. "That document could be forged." "Could be, but the county records office has the originals, along with the survey maps, the mineral rights certificates, and the water rights documentation, all legally filed and recorded 70 years ago. I'm destroying a criminal enterprise built on fraud and theft. What I'm curious about is how far you'll go to protect it. Already tried to kill a child. What's next?" "Get off my property," Margaret snarled. "Right now." "Or what?" "You'll call the police." "Please do. I'd love to show them everything I've discovered." That stopped her cold. The last thing they wanted was police attention. "This isn't over," Bob said as I turned to leave. I looked back at the three of them, standing there in Margaret's perfectly manicured yard, their criminal empire crumbling around them. "No, it's not," I agreed. "It's just beginning. Because now you know that I know everything. And you know that I'm not going away." As I walked back toward my cabin, I could feel them watching me, planning their next move, calculating how to eliminate the threat I represented. They'd already tried to kill Emma. The question wasn't if they'd escalate further, it was when. But this time, I'd be ready for them. The war for Crystal Lake was officially underway, and they had no idea they were fighting the lake's actual owner. What happened next unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of justice. Within 48 hours of my confrontation with the HOA board, Their entire world came crashing down in ways they never could have anticipated. It started when Sarah called me at 6 a.m., her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "David, you need to get down to the courthouse immediately. We're filing an emergency injunction, and you're going to want to see Margaret Chen's face when she realizes what's about to hit her." By the time I arrived, the courthouse was buzzing with activity. Sarah had assembled a legal team that included a federal prosecutor, an FBI financial crime specialist, and a county sheriff's detective. The paperwork they'd prepared was inches-thick criminal charges, civil suits, asset freezes, and emergency protective orders. "The FBI moved fast once they saw your evidence," Sarah explained as we walked into the hearing room. "Margaret Chen's bank accounts were frozen at midnight. Bob Hoffman was arrested at his Florida vacation home this morning. Janet Morrison turned herself in an hour ago and is already cooperating." But the real shock came when Judge Patricia Matthews reviewed our emergency motion and the evidence we'd compiled. Margaret sat in the defendant's section with her high-priced attorney, still radiating that arrogant confidence that had carried her through years of criminal activity. Until I stood up to present the original property deeds. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "What we have here is not just a case of fraud and attempted murder. We have 20 years of theft from the actual owner of Crystal Lake." I placed the 1952 deed on the evidence table, followed by the survey maps, the water rights certificates, and the mineral rights documentation. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Margaret's empire. The defendant and her associates have been operating under the false assumption that the lake was community property. In reality, my family has owned every drop of water, every fish, every mineral right, and every access point since 1952. The HOA has been collecting fees for access to property they never owned. Margaret's attorney frantically whispered to her, but I could see the color draining from her face as the implications hit her. This wasn't just about criminal charges anymore. This was about civil restitution that would bankrupt her and everyone involved. Judge Matthews studied the documents carefully before looking up at Margaret with barely concealed disgust. "Mrs. Chen, in 30 years on this bench, I have never seen such a calculated, comprehensive criminal enterprise. You didn't just steal money, you endangered a child's life to protect your illegal operation." "Your Honor," Margaret's attorney began, "we maintain that the incident with the child was a tragic accident." "Counselor," the judge interrupted, "your client's co-conspirator, Janet Morrison, has already provided testimony about the deliberate contamination of the lake water. She's also turned over security footage showing your client and her associates watching the victim struggle without rendering aid." The courtroom fell silent. Even I hadn't known about the security footage. Janet had documented their own crime. Furthermore, Judge Matthews continued, "The financial evidence shows systematic theft totaling over $3 million from community members who believed they were paying legitimate fees. The defendant used these funds for personal enrichment while violating her fiduciary duty to the homeowners." Margaret finally found her voice. "Your Honor, we were operating in good faith. We had no knowledge of any prior ownership claims." "Mrs. Chen," the judge cut her off, "your good faith defense might carry weight if you hadn't tried to murder a child when the rightful owner refused to pay your extortion fees." The words hit like a physical blow. Murder, extortion. The legal system was finally calling Margaret's actions what they really were. "Based on the evidence presented," Judge Matthews declared, "I am granting the plaintiff's emergency injunction. All HOA operations are suspended immediately. All collected fees for lake access dating back 20 years will be held in escrow pending restitution to the rightful owner. The defendant's assets are frozen pending criminal and civil proceeding." But the judge wasn't finished. "Additionally, I am ordering immediate environmental remediation of Crystal Lake at the defendant's expense. The deliberate contamination of a natural water source constitutes environmental terrorism, and this court will not tolerate such actions. Margaret stood frozen as the bailiff approached with handcuffs. Her empire, built on years of theft, intimidation, and fraud, had collapsed in a single hearing. "Your Honor," she said desperately, "I request immediate bail pending." Bail denied. The defendant has shown a willingness to harm children to protect her criminal enterprise. She poses a clear danger to the community. As Margaret was led away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days' peace. Not satisfaction or revenge, but genuine peace. Emma was safe. The threat was eliminated. Justice was being served. But the story didn't end there. Over the following weeks, the full scope of the HOA's crimes became clear. The FBI discovered that Margaret and her board had been running similar schemes in 3 other lake communities across the state. Dozens of families had been victimized, threatened, and extorted. The commercial fishing operation they'd sold rights they didn't own had been dumping industrial waste into Crystal Lake for 2 years. The environmental cleanup would cost millions, all of which would come from the defendant's seized assets. Most importantly, the other residents of the lake community rallied around my family once they learned the truth. Many had been intimidated by the board's tactics, forced to pay increasing fees they couldn't afford, threatened with legal action for minor violations. "We always knew something was wrong," my neighbor Tom Bradley told me as we watched the cleanup crews restore the lake bottom to its natural depth. But Margaret had us all scared. She made it seem like questioning the board was questioning the entire community. The psychological impact on Emma took months to heal, but she was resilient in the way only children can be. The lake that had become a source of terror slowly transformed back into her sanctuary, especially after the water tested clean and the artificial drop-off was eliminated. "Daddy," she said one evening as we sat on our dock, the same dock where she'd nearly died, "are the bad people ever coming back?" "No, sweetheart. They're going to prison for a very long time. And even if they wanted to come back, they can't. This is our lake, and we decide who gets to enjoy it." Margaret Chen was ultimately sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Bob Hoffman received 12 years and was ordered to pay full restitution from his seized assets. Janet Morrison, who cooperated with prosecutors, received 5 years, but will spend the rest of her life paying back the money she stole. The environmental cleanup took 6 months and cost $2.8 million. Every penny came from the assets seized from the 3 board members. The lake is now cleaner than it's been in decades, and fish populations are returning to healthy levels. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was watching the community transform. Without the fear and intimidation tactics of the corrupt board, neighbors began actually talking to each other. Community meetings became collaborative instead of authoritarian. People started enjoying the lake instead of living in fear of violating arbitrary rules. As for my family's ownership of Crystal Lake, we decided to do something Margaret Chen never could have imagined. We established a community trust that gives all residents permanent access to the lake while ensuring it's protected for future generations. No fees, no arbitrary rules, no intimidation, just families enjoying the natural beauty that belongs to all of us. The cabin that had been in our family for 70 years is still our sanctuary. Emma swims fearlessly in the clean water, plays on the restored natural shoreline, and has never again asked why people wanted to hurt her. The nightmare is over, replaced by the peace we'd always known at Crystal Lake. Sometimes people ask me if I regret confronting the HOA board so aggressively. If I wish I'd handled things differently or been more diplomatic in my approach. My answer is always the same. When someone tries to hurt your child, diplomacy ends and protection begins. Margaret Chen and her criminals chose to escalate the situation when they poisoned my daughter and watched her nearly drown. They thought they could intimidate me into submission or eliminate the threat I represented. They forgot that parents will move mountains to protect their children. And they never imagined that this particular parent owned the entire mountain they were trying to steal. The moral of this story isn't just about standing up to bullies or fighting for what's rightfully yours. It's about the courage to act when innocent people are being victimized, even when the odds seem impossible. Evil flourishes when good people stay silent, when communities allow fear to replace justice, when criminals believe they're untouchable. But here's what I learned through this ordeal. Truth has a power that no criminal enterprise can withstand. Justice may be slow, but it's ultimately unstoppable when good people refuse to give up. And family, protecting the people you love is worth any fight, any risk, any sacrifice. If you're watching this and facing your own impossible situation, remember that you're stronger than you know. Document everything, seek help from professionals, and never let anyone tell you that justice is impossible. Sometimes, the law moves slowly, but it does move. And if someone threatens your family, if someone hurts your children, remember that you have every right to fight back with everything you've got. The system works when good people use it correctly. Crystal Lake is peaceful now. Emma laughs as she swims in clean water. The community thrives without fear or intimidation. And somewhere in a federal prison, Margaret Chen has plenty of time to contemplate the consequences of underestimating a father's love for his daughter. Justice isn't always swift, but it's always worth fighting for. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more stories about standing up to those who think they're above the law. Because at the end of the day, no one is above protecting the people we love.